Hello and welcome to Pit Talk, a Fox Sports and Speed Cafe Formula One podcast. On today's episode, it's the last podcast of the year, and we're going to go through our favourite memories from 2023 and our way too early bold predictions for next season. My name's Michael Laminato, motorsport writer for Fox Sports Australia. It's great to have your company and the company of my co-hosts from Speed Cafe. He likes his one-day ethics investigations as much as the next man. It's Matt Posh.
The T20 format.
Very good. Also from Speed Cafe, he also won second at the Drivers' World Championship, but swears the FIA is just keeping the trophy safe. It's Ian Parks.
No, I've tucked it away somewhere, don't worry. Nicely hidden.
As long as it's safe. As long as it's safe somewhere. Giant FIA logos are very much in demand these days. Look, there was plenty to talk about in the last week, but you can read about that on the various websites. This week is the season review podcast. We'll look a little bit later on ahead to 2024. But I want to start, guys, with what you are going to remember most from the 2023 season. Some might say not a particularly memorable year. Some might be right. It's completely depending on your perspective, or largely whether or not you are Dutch or work for Red Bull Racing. But Ian, I'll start with you. 2023,
Yeah.
What are your favourite memories from this season?
There's one very particular memory for me. It's quite a personal one, but I think it's something that took place that I don't think has ever taken place before. And if the schedule for this particular Grand Prix changes next year, as has been requested, then I think it's something that will never take place next year as well. So in other words, it's quite unique. So that will be obviously that Thursday night, Friday morning that unfolded in Las Vegas. All the shenanigans that took place on track with the practice sessions, practice 2 being extended to 90 minutes, being run in front of empty fans. But for me personally, having finished work at about 5:30 a.m. in the morning, walking back to my hotel with the sun just coming up. So that's never happened to me before. I can't imagine that's ever happened to too many people in the F1 world before, unless they've gone out one night and got particularly hammered and then staggered back to their hotel room. But I'm talking about a situation where you've actually just physically finished work and you're walking back to your hotel. And that's why I say if the schedule changes for next year, as there is the possibility it could do, then that is very unlikely to be repeated. So for me, being in Las Vegas, walking back to my hotel with the sun just coming up, totally surreal. And it's just the biggest standout memory I've got. Just a unique experience. Quite enjoyable in some respects. It sounds a bit perverse, doesn't it? But to actually have finished your day's work at 5:30 a.m. and then to be walking back. So for me, that's the one. What about you, Matt?
Yeah, normally when you're getting home and the sun's coming up, it's been the sign of a really good night. Less so, I think that one is going to stick in the craw for probably the wrong reasons, that one. But that wasn't my memory. I guess mine's a little bit like yours, Ian, in that it's a little bit personal. Not quite to the same extent, though, but I go back to the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix or lack of Grand Prix, and the way that was cancelled, the events leading up to that. Us in Australia, we were sort of on the leading edge of that. When all the reports came out about, serious weather threats to that region and potentially at risk to the Grand Prix, I went to Formula One and I went to the FIA and they were going, yeah, we know there's a bit of weather around, but we're not seeing anything like what is coming out of Australia. So it was all emanating from this little island down under, sort of guessing at what's going to happen in the days to come. And I flew out to that race, and it was all going, just bring an umbrella, bring a jacket, you'll be fine. Then I'm on the plane for 13, 14 hours or whatever it is. And you land in Dubai and there's a message. The Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix is being cancelled. We'll have an announcement out shortly. Which I still ended up going to Imola and the Emilia-Romagna region. I could have chosen to change my plans and stayed in Milan and lived it up for a week. But I chose to go down there because I'm of the opinion that as a journalist, we've got a responsibility, not just necessarily to tell the story about Formula One, but there might have been a bigger story there that we can help relay. So I went down there and had a look, and I'm so glad that I did. Formula One made the right call. I stand by that to this day. By the weekend of the race, it could have run, but in good conscience, it could have. So many people had lost their lives, lost their livelihoods, lost everything that they owned. But to see the towns around Imola, Faenza, which is not too far away. It's only sort of 20 minutes away from Imola, which is where AlphaTauri is based, or Racing Bulls is based. To see the way they rallied and recovered. And the night that I left that region, I was just driving along looking for some dinner. And I came across this car park just full of people. I couldn't figure it out. So I was like, what's going on? So I stopped in and just had a look. And it was pretty much the entire town had got together. They were all caked in mud. And they were just having a massive party. It was a week on from devastating floods that saw the cancellation of a Grand Prix. And they were drinking and dancing and singing and doing everything that you wouldn't expect. And it was just really human moment. So that's something that I will take with me forever, because it's not what I expected when I got on the plane in Sydney to see that weekend in Imola. It was extraordinary. I don't think I'll ever experience anything like it, and I hope I don't, because obviously it wasn't a positive experience to generate that.
Yeah, that was such a weird day, really, or only even a few hours as it happened, as that story unfolded. Not only the storms that were lashing the region, but then the cancellation of the race. I'd only just landed in Milan as it was becoming clearer that things were going wrong, watching Italian news in my relatively rudimentary understanding of Italian, trying to figure out what various politicians were saying. And then it was the Deputy Prime Minister who said we shouldn't hold this race, and subsequently everything kind of unfolded from there. Well, I can't call that a favourite memory now because you've already taken it, but also sitting in a tiny hotel room at Milan airport while the whole reason I'd flown there was collapsing. Not a particularly great memory. Well, look, my memories are less personal, I guess, in that sense then, because I'm just going to talk about something boring, old, sporting related. Something that really surprised me, though, this year, which was the total lack of importance in championship sense of Mercedes, something that really surprised me. I remember thinking at the end of last year, at the last few races, particularly as we got towards Brazil, the United States, that Mercedes was just exuding this really significant confidence. Even in the middle of the year when they were still trying to find their way, they seemed a little bit like they knew where they were going, particularly by the end of the year. The way the team personnel were talking, the way the drivers were talking seemed very much more optimistic. And of course, that was only 1 year on from Mercedes being on a long run of Constructors' Championship victories. The fact that Mercedes were not contenders really at all this year, bar the odd race where they were close-ish, never close enough to be the only other team that wasn't Red Bull Racing to win this year, really did surprise me. And it sort of in the broader context of the story of this championship over the last few years, is I feel like we're now at the point where we can't really assume that Mercedes is a force. You know, last year, change of regulations coming off the back of all those constructor standings, this kind of tacit background belief where it was like, well, they made a mistake this year, but they will be back. Inevitably, they will be. Think about the regulation changes this team survived during its long, dominant run. The fact that they didn't get it right this year, I think essentially just puts them straight back into the pack. It puts a hard close on that idea that the Mercedes era might not yet be over. I mean, I think Red Bull Racing and Max Verstappen probably put their exclamation mark on the end of that sentence anyway by their performances this season. But I thought that was really, I can't help but wonder whether this season, as an extension of last year, will really be reflected upon as A, the end of that Mercedes era, and then B, something we'll decide in the next couple of years what that means for Lewis Hamilton in the quest for that 8th world champion, because how much of a story was Lewis Hamilton this year? His contract negotiations, disappointment with the car. It's just this interesting, of course, subplot because they were nowhere near the front of the field. But for me, I found that, I think in the broadest story of this year, something really quite interesting. And the importance of that will be decided in future years, as I said. That was 2023, I suppose. That was, well, some of the stories from 2023. There weren't that many more stories, to be honest. But anyway, you can go and read about those.
Bloke,
in the
Max, he was a
website.
pretty big story. What was it? What was
Nah,
his name?
he was all right.
It's gone.
V something, wasn't
Vincenzo
it? Yeah.
Sospiri. No, that's
Max,
not
Something
it.
like
Max,
that.
yeah.
Yeah, he was in a song, wasn't he? I think he was in a
Supermax.
song. Yes, that's
Supermax.
well.
Supermax.
All had enough between that and the Dutch national anthem. It's going to be hard to get them out of here before
If
the
you've
start
got
of next
Spotify,
season.
the same guys that did Supermax also did Lando. Lando the
Ah,
Lion.
yes. So they did.
Yeah.
Yes. Still, that's their only two songs.
I've not heard
I
that
think.
one.
They are
Yeah.
both brilliant because they're terrible. I really do encourage you to go and listen to
I've
them.
heard Supermax.
They're abominations, and for that reason, I love them.
Got to admire the enthusiasm, if nothing else. But look, 2024 is, I hesitate to say it, but just around the corner. It's not far away now. I'm not going to be the person who counts down till preseason testing because a lot of people just need a bit of a break. Enjoy the break, embrace the break, watch some cricket or the sport in your capital city. But let's make, with the benefit of having no real information whatsoever for next year. We haven't, the cars have not even been launched, not even the pretend cars have been launched in the way that Red Bull tends to do, or not even the CGI versions of the cars, as Haas tends to do, have been revealed. We have zero information about next year other than what we saw, of course, this year. So I'm very interested to know what our big predictions are for 2024, safe in the knowledge that as a podcast, this will live forever, and whatever you decide to say at this moment could come back and bite you at a later point. But Matt, I'll start with you. If you had to make one big prediction for 2024,
I've organised my office a little bit differently. I didn't realise I was in the hot seat. But there you go. All right.
It's just 'cause it's summer.
It is very warm as we're recording this.
Not where I am.
I'll swap you in. Trust me, it's uncomfortably warm.
Yeah.
My prediction is pretty boring in that I don't think we're going to see a dominant team next year. Red Bull has been dominant, and everyone's saying they've switched their focus to 2024 early. That's a sign of confidence and comfort, but it's also a risk, isn't it? By not upgrading throughout 2023, they don't have that continual validation and corroboration between all their tools, their theories, their philosophies, and everything that they're applying to next year's car. They're taking a pretty big gamble on the fact that every line that Adrian Newey has put on his drawing board, when they put that into the real world, it's right. That's effectively the line in the sand that they've drawn. Every other team, they've developed their cars further into the year, but a lot of it is transferable. There are teams out there like Mercedes who are taking a completely different approach, and that's not going to be the case. They're going to be in a very different boat, and I think they will struggle. But the teams that have developed all the way through 2023, I don't believe are going to be at the disadvantage that some suggest versus Red Bull, who sort of cut and run in terms of the development of the 24 car. I don't think the Golf is going to be there. The marginal gains are still there, but we saw this year that a couple of changes and you can be right up in the mix. So I think everything will condense. I don't think Red Bull's going to be a second a lap quicker like we saw at the start of 2023, and I think we're going to have a more competitive championship in season 2024. And it's not just the optimist in me saying that. I firmly believe that is the case, because there was too much development in the back end of this year for that not to be the case, and for some of that not to encroach on Red Bull, in my opinion.
I like, Matt,
Which
that
is
you're...
why... Go on, Michael.
Just briefly, I like, Matt, that your prediction is we're not going to have record-breaking dominance. Like, the bar to be a less dominant year, it only just has to not break records. Which, I hope you're right in that sense, because man, we don't need another one of those.
Well, let's just
Nobody will be reading, watching, listening at any stage if that's the case next year. Everybody would have turned
It'll
off.
be
from
my
Formula
mum
One.
watching this, and that'll be about it.
Well,
One more than nothing.
Yeah, well,
exactly.
we don't know how the ratings boxes work. That could still count for a lot of people. If she's in the right demographic, everything is fine. I mean, I like the logic of that. I do like the logic of that as a prediction. The fact that Red Bull hasn't had that chance, but if the gamble is on as you put it, every stroke of Adrian Newey's pencil converting into the real world. Well, I like those odds because historically, those are good odds. And Red Bull, and yeah, like without detracting from that idea that they haven't had an ongoing opportunity to build on this car, they have had some opportunities to build on this car. And I can't help but think as well that the decision to switch entirely to next year's car must exude some level of confidence that actually that development trajectory is correct. If there was any doubts, presumably they would have been allowing themselves the opportunity to experiment a little bit more this year. I mean, I can't help but come back to the fact that I hope you're right. I really want this bold prediction to be anything but. But I think that while we should be confident next year will be better, I don't think it's as straightforward as to say that, well, they've passed an opportunity. Also, because I can't help but distrust every time Christian Horner says, well, that development penalty for the cost cap still hasn't bit us yet. I don't want to give him the satisfaction of being that right.
We just need to look at history, though. We've seen eras of domination, and then they come to a grinding halt. And I'm not going to suggest that Red Bull's going to stop and be, what's the team that was dominant and then terrible? Think of Lotus 79. The Lotus 79 was a glorious car, dominated 78. 1979 was P nowhere. I don't think that's going to happen, but I think there'll be more competition. Red Bull's still going to be a championship contender, but it'll have more competition. That's my not quite so bold, slightly italicized prediction.
I mean, what do you think about that, Ian? Do you think... I mean, surely it can't be another season exactly like this.
Maybe well hope so. Otherwise, Christ, as we talked about earlier, we're all going to be switching off and scratching around wanting to do something else. I mean, there are 24 Grand Prix. So if you think about it, they could actually break the records next season if they won 23 out of 24, because there you go, there's an even higher percentage rate, etc., etc. But I disagree with Matt on one particular point. I think, Matt, you talked about Mercedes not being quite there next year again.
Yep.
Is that right? Yep. Did I hear that? Yeah. See, I do believe that Mercedes are going to be back in the race next season. And the reason for that is I cannot believe that they can get it so badly wrong 3 years in a row. As we know, year one last year, 2022, they got it very badly wrong. They carried over that car, as you rightly alluded to, Michael, with regard to the end of 2022. They did so well. They carried confidence, decided, yeah, this car's going to be good enough into 2023. Very quickly it became apparent that was not the case, that they had to take a different design direction. And in doing so, it meant that the budget cap for 2023 was not quite so much exhausted, but they could only do a limited amount on that car in terms of building it up towards 2024. And of course, the one significant aspect with regard to Mercedes is they brought James Allison back in. They got rid of the guy, they basically swapped roles. Mike Elliott, TD, took over from James Allison, has now taken over James Allison's Chief Technical Officer role, while James has gone back to the Technical Director role. I think over the course of this past season, they've been experimenting considerably going into 2024. They now recognise that the balance of the car, the forwardness of the cockpit, shall we say, will be corrected for 2024. And they will have a car that provides Lewis Hamilton in particular with the back end that he craves, that's more stable under braking, going through corners. And I think we're going to see a very different Mercedes. As I say, I cannot believe they're going to get it wrong for 3 consecutive years. And just one other prediction, and I'm not saying this because I'm working on an Aussie website, I'm writing and talking on an Aussie podcast, Aussie-based podcast. I do believe we're going to see Oscar Piastri win a Grand Prix next season. I'll leave it there and let you guys discuss
And that, folks, we're going to end it there because I reckon that's a bomb. No, that's a cracker. I agree with you. I agree.
Yes.
Yeah.
I like that. I hope he wins the Grand Prix so that we can stop making that distinction between sprint winner and Grand Prix winner, if nothing else. That's all I want.
You've got to face it. It was one of only 2 drivers to beat a Red Bull last year.
Yep.
Yes, it is a great way to look at it, and I do think that
Red Bull, yeah.
And this will. I mean, I won't I won't act as a precursor to my own prediction. In fact, I'll change my prediction so I can talk about this now, I suppose. But I do think we've got good reason to think McLaren can be the closest challenger next year. And this ties in, I guess, to your Mercedes prediction as well, because they are in that front-running group ultimately. But McLaren, if we tie in Matt's prediction as well here, look at this. What a beautiful moment of synergy between all three predictions. Is that if we compare all the different development trajectories of this year, McLaren's been really the only team of those front runners that have developed through the year and have developed on the trajectory that will continue into next year. Whereas Red Bull will evolve the car but didn't do a lot of development this year. Mercedes, completely new car. Ferrari is sort of in that mode of thinking as well. They've suggested the car's going to be quite different next year as well. Aston Martin's hard to know exactly, but maybe they're in the mix there somewhere as well. But let's put them to one side for a moment. So I think the Oscar Piastri prediction has great basis in what we've seen this year. And on the Mercedes side, okay, maybe I was, in thinking about this year, maybe I was a little bit harsh. I don't know what you guys think about this because it was so disappointing for them this year. But at the end of this season, they did finish second in the championship. Lewis Hamilton, extremely consistent. If they just get it right, then they don't have to necessarily make an enormous step, I guess. Like, that's probably one way to look at it.
Yeah, it's still a massive gulf that they've got to overcome, because it's not just a case of drawing a new car. It's making sure they understand everything that underpins that car, because it's not just the car that they put out on track in winter testing. That car is already out of date by the time it hits track, because I've already worked out where its weaknesses are, at least in theory. They'll validate that in testing and have a suite of upgrades to come in the early races. So it's understanding that what they've got and what they've designed, is having that real basic knowledge. And it sounds trivial. These are ground effect cars. Clearly, they're not easy. Otherwise, we wouldn't be seeing the massive swings in performance that we have done. But to have that knowledge and that understanding is crucial. And I think we've seen, and to your point, Michael, we've seen that at McLaren. You know, the same people. I actually spoke to Zach Brown for an episode of the Summer Grill series that Speed Cafe runs. It's coming up in a couple of weeks. But it's the same people that designed the upgraded, the B-spec MCL 60 has designed the original car. The only real difference is the shuffling of the technical department. So that team understands it, and you've seen the progress that can make. So if Mercedes understands what they've done, then yeah, they could be right up there. My concern is that having such a big change, there is a greater risk at not having that fundamental understanding from day one, at a time when your competitors have 18 months development head start on you effectively.
Which is why I think that they've been trying to garner that understanding over the course of the past few months, when they recognised they got it so badly wrong, and they eventually did bring upgrades on the car. Some worked, some didn't. So it's a case of applying that knowledge now to the W15, and then at least they will have a far better platform on which to work next season than they have the past two seasons. And that's why I think, even if they're not right there at the front very early on, they will most certainly be clawing their way back towards the front over the course of throughout the course of next season.
It's a really important season too, isn't it? This kind of ties into anything you're going to hear or read about over the next few months as we head into the year, which is it's the penultimate season of this regulation set, which means if you are Mercedes or any team really in that front-running group, and next year's car is no good, if it's a bit rubbish again, it's going to be a question of how much resource you want to then devote to trying to be really good in 2025 when you've got 26 around the corner. Now, there are financial regulations that mean you can't start spending on 26 until we get to 25, so that does soften that blow a little bit. But realistically, if you don't think you're going to close the gap in that last year of the rules, then you're just going to spend your way through 2024, try to get to what you can, and then focus all of your energies on 2026. Because realistically, we already know a good few teams, particularly in the lower part of the field, the teams that are not really in victory contention or have any hope of being in victory contention, are already thinking about 2026. All of this time is just structuring themselves to 2026. Even McLaren, to a certain extent, I'm interested to see how that and if that goal changes. But at the start of the year, all the talk was just about being prepared for 26. That's what all the infrastructure was about. So for any team in this front-running group that doesn't get it right next year, some big and difficult questions will have to be asked. And if the case is that no one's caught Red Bull, well, then some difficult questions will be asked by all of us, wondering what the point of the next two championships are. But that's a question for March or April, perhaps. Well, look, let me give you my prediction then, and it is a little bit more of an optimistic one, and that is that next year, finally, Ferrari will pull itself together. And this is me falling into exactly the same trap I fell into with Mercedes last year, which was at the end of last year. It seemed like the team knew what it was doing. And I get that sense from Ferrari this year. The last upgrades it brought, particularly I think in the United States as it was, or in that last half of the last third of the year anyway, really seemed to take a step forward in terms of the team's understanding of how to set up the car, how to make the car work. I think Charles Leclerc is a really good barometer in that team of when the car is acting in a predictable way and when the team understands the car, because we got a great contrast with him between Carlos Sainz. In the first half of the year, when the car wasn't really perfect, Sainz had this upper hand. But when the car is in the sweet spot, not just in terms of the setup and the mechanics of it, when the whole team is kind of working well, Charles Leclerc just goes that extra distance and can prove he's kind of one of the fastest guys in F1. He got all those pole positions towards the end of the year. If you look at the average of the last 5 races, in fact, he is the fastest. With Ferrari, he makes them the fastest team in terms of one lap pace, which is really remarkable when you consider the year we've had with Red Bull Racing. So there are these really interesting signs of optimism, tempered a little bit, as we already sort of talked about, by the idea that Ferrari hasn't given away necessarily one way or the other how much next year's car is going to change. It seems like it's going to be a bigger change than just an evolution. And considering that this year's car started looking a lot like last year's car, that's pretty understandable. But I'm just a little bit buoyed that things seem to be clicking, the reorganization of Frederick Vasseur, all that kind of stuff this year. And I hope that that is the case, at least because it gives us some competitiveness next year, perhaps between 3 teams if McLaren keeps that trajectory up.
From what I've heard, there are some positive changes within the walls of Maranello. Take what happens on track aside, but some of the things that Fred has done at Maranello have been positive. Things like, just moving where various staff members' offices are so that they're more in cohesion with one another, not having to walk across roads and in between different sites and those sorts of things, because Maranello is a sprawling facility. So that's positive. I get what you're saying, but I'm just still not convinced. That team is still strategically, I don't think it's there. I'm going to get crucified for saying this, but I don't think Charles Leclerc is a world champion or a world championship winning driver.
Now we're really getting bold.
Well, he makes a lot of mistakes. I want to see him really settle down. And I think to do that, he needs the car under him. He needs the confidence in the team and everything else, because he's one of these drivers that pushes to 11 tenths. He's a little bit like in Senna mold in that he pushes so hard on every conceivable corner and every conceivable lap that it is only a matter of time before he throws at the scenery. If he's got the car underneath him and the confidence, that settles down a little bit. And it's for that reason I say right now he's not I don't see him as a world championship winning driver. Carlos Sainz, I do see as a world championship winning driver, I hasten to add. What he did in Singapore was brilliant. I see him as of the 2 Ferrari drivers. If I was in the market, I'd be going after Carlos, not Charles, because you don't win a race over a single lap, but you do win a race with the sort of intelligence that Carlos showed in Singapore.
Yeah, he did have 2 amazing races if you think about Monza as well. Obviously, yeah, he defended so brilliantly there and unfortunately made a slight mistake towards the end that cost him. But you made a point as well, Michael, about the upgrades towards the end of the season, and they did play more towards Charles than they did Carlos. Carlos was steady, consistent, mediocre, you could almost say in some respects, until those 2 great performances in Singapore and Italy. Nothing about what Carlos did last season stands out in my mind, apart from those 2 races, and apart from his failure in Qatar, of course, when he didn't get to start. But that's something that didn't happen. But on track, I'm going to go even bolder. I don't see either of them at the minute as world championship material. But I'm saying at the minute. I just don't think Ferrari, for me, and it's been the same for many years now, has been able to put everything together over the course of one season for any of its drivers. And until it does that, then it's always going to be this team that's looking up at top spot, wishing it was there, rather than being consistently in the mix for that top spot. Until it pulls everything together, as I say, it's tough for them. And maybe they can get it right for 26, but I don't see it happening for the next 2 seasons. I really don't.
Kimi Raikkonen is our last world champion in 2007. So we'll look at 16 years ago. I remember the conversation in the late 90s about Ferrari and its lack of world championships and how Jody Scheckter was its last world champion from 1979. And then we saw Ferrari get on its run with Michael Schumacher. But that was a process that took years. You think Jean Todt joined that team, he replaced Cesare Fiorio in 1993. Ross Brawn, Rory Byrne, they joined with Michael Schumacher in 96. Potentially they could have won the championship in 99 had Schumacher not broken his leg. Eddie Irvine went close. But, that's a minimum, that's a three-year deal. So if we look at Fred Vasseur as the modern-day Jean Todt, so to speak, how many years are we away from finding the next Ross Brawn and Rory Byrne to support him and then have that driver as well in the right place, in the right frame of mind, in the right time of their career, provided no one else is doing anything better, Red Bull. It's a big call, Michael. That is the boldest of the bold. The question is it beautiful?
I think I'm right in saying as well that Ferrari has had more change of leadership over the past 20 years than any other Formula One team.
Oh, here we go.
That's puzzling there.
That's what that silence is.
Yeah.
Everyone's just thinking, is that true? I'm willing to say it must be true. Like, that sounds about accurate. There'd be some bad, you know what? If we just count, the latter Caterham years, for example, new Caterham years, or new Lotus,
Alpine and Renault.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, yes, it's certainly in broader management senses.
Yeah, definitely. But the point I was alluding to when I made that point was that Ferrari reminds me of, drawing on football now, Ferrari reminds me of a team that was trying to recapture its past glories. And in doing so, it thinks that changes of leadership is the right way forward. Like a football team changes its manager simply because that manager hasn't won a title that year, for argument's sake, or won a cup competition. Then Ferrari reminds me of, as I say, a football team that constantly changes managers just to simply try and recapture the past, believing that a new manager under new leadership can lead the team to this great new era, which it just isn't happening at the minute. I still see flaws inside Ferrari, and as much as I love Fred as a character and as a personality, and as much as I can see what he's doing behind the scenes, he's still got a massive job on his hands. And I only hope that, like any football manager within a football club that's trying to recapture that past glory, he's given enough time, because as Matt has pointed out, it took a long time under the Jean Todt era for it all to finally come together. That's what Fred needs at the minute. Give him those years, and maybe he might just get there.
Yeah, and it's worth remembering, and I remember this from time to time as well, that Ferrari, a lot of people still have in their head that Ferrari is sort of a constant winning machine, and what we're experiencing now is unusual, but it's never the case. It is massive periods of just heartbreaking drought if you're an Italian, and then you get like 6 years in a row where you're really good or thereabouts, and then it's just absolute famine again for a decade sometimes. And this may be, in fact, be one of the longest. I was thinking about this the other day. This would get close to, at 16 years, this would be close to one of the longest between championships.
Second longest.
But it's not unusual.
Second longest between Scheckter and Schumacher.
Hold on.
There you go. So
the oracle has spoken.
But between that, it was Phil Hill in 61 and Niki Lauda in 74.
There you go. But that's still, there you go. So we're close, but it's 3 years over that limit now, which means you could look at that two ways. Either they're due or this is just going to set a new record. We are in a record-breaking year, aren't we? So we'll wait and see how that goes. But I do think that I can see the pieces being coming close. I hear what you're all saying, and I think they're all perfectly valid points. I mean, Ferrari has a lot to prove still, and getting close is never enough, particularly when you're up against a team like Red Bull Racing, which is doing virtually nothing wrong, and you have Max Verstappen, who's a perfect unity with the team. That is an extremely high bar. Even Ferrari did pull itself together. There's no guarantee they'll even win races next year, despite having won one this year, I suppose. But I'm more optimistic for the team at the end of this year than I was even 6 months ago. Let's say that. The start of the year, I really thought this was going to be another very long-term problematic period for Ferrari. But I'm more optimistic that it may not be so long anymore. But at least look, I think they were all good bold predictions. But I'm happy if you agree that one was the boldest. We'll wait and see. That's the beauty of bold predictions.
I've just got one final question for you two guys, just to end the show with. Dropping your rose-tinted spectacles, how will Daniel Ricciardo fare next season, and will he be back in the Red Bull seat in 25?
Good question.
Wow.
Can't believe we didn't actually
Let's
mention that already. Very good. I like you're upholding the Australian component of the content required, and you're doing very well.
Absolutely.
I mean, Matt, do you want to start?
Not a chance. After you.
I do think that the whatever we're going to be calling AlphaTauri Racing Bulls, whatever it is, complete with the 2 sponsor names from the Americas as required, is going to be one of the most interesting driver lineups next year because there is so much on the line. I can't see Sergio Perez making the step forward required to put his seat, let's say, beyond doubt. Even if he takes a step forward, I just can't see it being enough to overwrite the memories of this year, particularly if our various predictions come true and next year is more competitive, whatever shape that takes, because it wouldn't take a much more competitive season for Red Bull to have serious trouble in the constructors' standings if Sergio Perez is as much of the pace as he was this year and if someone takes a few wins off Max Verstappen. And that question, what I don't know, and this is the piece that is uncertain, is how good Daniel has to do to make himself the driver that replaces Sergio Perez. Is it enough to just beat Yuki Tsunoda consistently? Does he absolutely have to destroy him? A lot of that's going to depend on the quality of that car. It seemed to take good steps forward late this year, but as we've talked about several times now, a lot of teams look like they're taking step forwards at the end of the season and end up nowhere the following year. So I really don't know, but I'm optimistic because I think we saw some good performances this year, and even some of his worst performances, there were a lot of, I know we're always going to look for the asterisks, but there were a lot of explaining factors that can talk around some of the lower days. So I'm optimistic at this point in time, but it's so difficult to know where the goalposts are, and I think that's what I'm really excited to find out next year. But what do you think?
I love that in a question about Daniel Ricciardo, you spent most of your time talking about Sergio Perez.
Wow. That's the question. No, that's what we're here for.
I think we're looking at the old Daniel now. That's the first and most important thing. In the years that he spent at McLaren and whatever happened there, that's a distant memory. You just need to listen to the way he speaks, the way he walks, and the way he smiles. He's a different Daniel to what he was 12 and 24 months ago.
Yeah.
He did a really good interview with Tom Clarkson on Beyond the Grid, in which he spoke about getting back in the Red Bull for that tyre test in Silverstone. He said in his first run, in 7 or 8 laps, he spun twice. And he didn't care. Where once upon a time, 12 months ago, that would have probably bitten into him. He didn't care. He goes, oh, well, I'm rusty. That makes sense. And then his first new tyre run, he did a lap that was good enough to be second on the grid for the British Grand Prix in a car that he'd never driven before. Now, there's all sorts of different bits and pieces we need to caveat that with. But even still, that's significant. The pace is still there. The ability is still there. His technical prowess. He's taken AlphaTauri. He can take a lot of the credit for the transformation of that team because he took AlphaTauri down a different technical route in terms of car setup. He's given that team leadership, and Yuki Tsunoda is benefiting from that. So the question, therefore, is not does he need to be Yuki Tsunoda or how much does he need to be Yuki Tsunoda by? I think that's already done. Yuki Tsunoda is largely there, I think, for Honda. So I think we can park Yuki to one side. It's therefore a straight fight between is Daniel staying at AlphaTauri or Racing Bulls for 2025 at the expense of Sergio at Red Bull, or what does he need to do to win that little tussle? And I think provided Daniel shows well enough, doesn't make mistakes, is beating Yuki regularly without demolishing him. He doesn't need to, as long as he's getting the most out of that car and is showing Red Bull everything that he's currently shown them. I think he'll be in that car for 2025. So I think this year Daniel has to have a pretty bad year not to be in Red Bull for 2025. And the reason I say that is largely financial. Why would they be paying two drivers similar amounts of money, 10 odd million? Daniel's, I understand, not on that anymore. But why would they keep spending $10 million on a driver when they can spend half or a third of that and get the same results out of another driver who they know on his own day can put in results similar to Max? All the while they can, blood Liam Lawson as the next one in perhaps 27 or 28, whenever Daniel calls it a day, or whenever Red Bull decides to call it a day for him. I think the decision's already been made. Daniel has to screw up next year not to be at Red Bull in 25.
Yeah, that's a good, bold call. I like it. I mean, Ian, you started this. Do you have an opinion before we wrap it up?
To be honest, I wholeheartedly agree with Matt. And the one point I will add is that we pretty much know that there will be a seat going at that team. There could potentially be two seats, because we know that Liam Lawson is almost nigh on guaranteed, given the remarks of Helmut Marko in particular, to be in a Racing Bulls. I might as well give them the name without the sponsors, because Matt and I are pretty confident that's the name they're going to go with for from next season onwards. As I say, he's going to be there because he produced a brilliant 5-race cameo this season. He absolutely nailed it. Produced some wonderful performances, wonderful drives. Helmut Marko was singing his praises, which is extraordinarily rare for Helmut Marko to be singing the praises of a driver the way he did about Liam. So absolutely Liam will be on that grid, in that team in 2025. So it's a case of which seat does he take? Will Yuki have been jettisoned? Will Daniel be in Red Bull? I would like to think and hope it'll be the latter. And we get to see even more of the old Daniel next season. And with a full season under his belt, injury-free, going into 25, confident, and giving Max Verstappen the hardest time he will have likely have had since he took up the Red Bull seat many years ago now.
Well, what a tremendously optimistic note to end an Australian podcast for the year on. I'm very pleased that we ended up exactly where we needed to end up, which is to all declare that Daniel Ricciardo will be back at Red Bull Racing in the near future. Knowing Red Bull, could be even next year, could be partway through next year. Who would take that off the table? No one, certainly. Gentlemen, that's the end of the podcast for this week and also this series. Thanks so much for chatting over the course of the last how many months we've been doing this. It's not always been great racing, but it's always been great fun to chat. So thank you very much for that. You can subscribe to Pit Talk wherever you get your favorite podcasts. You can also watch the podcast on YouTube. Just search for Fox Sports Australia, and you can follow updates throughout the off-season at foxsports.com.au and speedcafe.com. From Matt Kosh, Ian Parks, and me, Michael Laminato, we'll catch you in 2024.